The air was thick with tension the moment Charles stepped into the grand living room of his mansion. His eyes landed on the brown paper bag sitting on the dining table and his jaw tightened. The aroma of pepper soup drifted through the room, but instead of feeling satisfied, his heart pounded with growing rage. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He dropped his briefcase on the marble floor and marched toward the table. The bag was neatly sealed, and beside it lay a receipt with a restaurant's logo printed in bold letters. His eyes darkened. Pepper soup from a restaurant? He had given clear instructions that morning. Ella, his wife, was to prepare pepper soup for his dinner. Not order it. Not bring it from outside. Make it herself. Charles's nostrils flared as he clenched his fists. How dare she disobey me? Ella, he bellowed, his voice echoing through the luxurious house. From the couch in the corner, Ella stirred. She was sitting with her hand on her waist, her swollen belly rising with each strained breath. She turned her head toward him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Her skin glistened with sweat and her face was pale. Good evening, Charles, she said softly, shifting in discomfort. Charles stalked toward her, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor like the ticking of a bomb. His gaze was fixed on her. No warmth, only suspicion and anger. What is this? He demanded, pointing toward the bag on the table. Ella hesitated. I ordered the pepper soup, she answered, her voice shaky but calm. You ordered it? His voice was low but sharp. What were you doing all day that you couldn't cook a simple pot of pepper soup? Charles, please, she whispered. I had terrible waist pain today. I could barely stand. I tried to push through but I couldn't. So an hour before you came back I ordered it. Charles's lips twitched with disgust. He paced the floor, rubbing his temples. Waist pain? That's your excuse? You sit at home all day doing nothing and you couldn't make pepper soup? Ella winced. The baby shifted inside her, and she placed a hand on her belly as though to protect her child from the anger crackling through the air. I don't sit all day, she said, her voice trembling. I clean. I wash. I cook. I've done everything you asked for years without help. But this pregnancy, it's different. I'm struggling, Charles. Struggling? Charles laughed bitterly. My mother gave birth to 6 children without complaining. My sisters take care of their homes without whining about waist pain. And you order my food from a restaurant like I'm a stranger? He glared at her, his eyes cold. Lazy. That's what you are. Tears welled up in Ella's eyes. The words stung, but she tried to stay calm. I'm not lazy, Charles. I just need help. Charles stopped pacing. His head snapped toward her. Did you just say I don't listen to you? His voice was dangerously low. Ella's breath caught in her throat. What had she just said? She hadn't meant it as an attack. She only wanted him to understand her pain. But the look in his eyes sent fear coursing through her veins. You're calling me a bad husband now? Saying I don't listen? After everything I've done for you? His footsteps grew louder as he approached her. Trust, please. I didn't mean it like that, she said, trying to rise from the couch, but her waist screamed in pain. He was standing over her now. His eyes burned with wounded pride and unchecked rage. So it has come to this, he said through clenched teeth. Not only do you disobey me, but now you insult me too. Ella opened her mouth to speak, but before the words came, she saw him reach for the paper bag on the table. Her heart raced. Charles, no. Too late. He grabbed the steaming bowl of pepper soup, still hot from the restaurant's pot. In one swift motion he tilted it forward. The burning liquid splashed across Ella's chest and arm. A sharp, agonizing scream tore from her throat as the peppery heat seared her skin. She jerked backward, clutching her chest, her mind blank with pain. The baby inside her twisted in distress. The bowl clattered to the floor, rolling under the couch. Charles stood there, his chest heaving, his face shadowed with rage. Maybe now you'll learn to respect me, he muttered. Ella writhed on the couch, tears streaming down her face. Her skin felt as if it were on fire. The sharp sting of the pepper invaded every nerve, and the unbearable pain in her waist intensified. Her breaths came in short, frantic gasps. Through the haze of suffering she heard the front door slam. The sound of Charles's car engine roared to life. Tires screeched against the pavement as he sped away, leaving her alone in that luxurious prison of agony. The mansion fell into eerie silence, broken only by Ella's muffled sobs. She needed help. The pepper burned without mercy, and every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her body. With trembling hands she reached for her phone on the glass table. Her vision blurred with tears as she scrolled to the name. Linda, best friend. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello? Ella? Linda's voice came through, filled with concern. Linda, Ella gasped. Help me, please. What's wrong? Ella, what happened? My skin, it's burning. Pulse. He poured hot soup on me, Ella choked. Jesus. Linda cried. I'm coming now. Right now. Ella let the phone slip from her hand. Her body sagged against the couch. The baby shifted again as though sensing the danger. She cradled her belly, whispering through the pain, It's okay, baby, we'll be okay. The front door burst open 10 minutes later. Linda rushed in, her eyes wide with shock as she took in Ella's red, blistering skin and the broken woman cradling her unborn child. Let's go, Linda said, wrapping a shawl around Ella's shoulders. Every step was torture. Each movement brought new waves of pain. But Ella held on, clutching Linda's hand as they stumbled out of the mansion into the cold night. The car sped through the city streets toward the hospital. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Ella closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. The hospital lights were too bright, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. Ella lay on a white hospital bed, the crisp sheets tangled around her body as she stared at the ceiling, her heart still racing from the pain. Her skin burned like fire, but it wasn't just the physical pain that gripped her. It was the ache of betrayal, the crushing weight of Charles's cruelty, and the overwhelming sense of loneliness that threatened to swallow her whole. Linda had stayed by her side through the entire ordeal, holding her hand and reassuring her that everything would be all right. But in the quiet moments when Linda stepped out to speak with the doctor, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that something had been irreparably broken. She had always tried to please Charles, to be the wife he wanted, the wife he demanded. But now as she lay there burned and broken, she wondered if he had ever truly loved her at all. Ella, Linda's voice cut through her thoughts. She stepped back into the room, a worried expression on her face. The doctor said you need to rest. He wants to keep you here overnight for observation. Your burns aren't too deep, but you've got to stay off your feet. Ella nodded, though she barely heard Linda's words. She was too lost in the storm of emotions swirling inside her. How could he? The question echoed over and over in her mind, each repetition digging deeper into her heart. Linda, Ella said softly, her voice breaking. I can't go back there. I can't face him. I don't know what to do. Linda sat down beside her, gently placing a hand on her swollen belly. You don't have to go back, Ella. You don't owe him anything. What he did to you is unforgivable. You're not alone. You have me and you have your baby. We'll figure this out together. Ella's tears began to fall, silently at first, then in great uncontrollable sobs. Her body shook with the force of her grief. She had tried for so long to be the perfect wife, to do everything Charles asked of her. She had swallowed her pride and her dreams, all for him. And now she had nothing. Nothing but a broken marriage and the devastating truth that the man she had loved could turn on her so easily. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Charles. She didn't even need to read it to know what it said. I'm sorry. Come home. Let's talk. Ella felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. Sorry? He was sorry? She didn't believe it for a second. His apology was empty, just another manipulation to get her back into his control. He didn't care about her, not really. He only cared about his pride, his image, and his power over her. She stared at the phone for a long moment, her fingers trembling as she hovered over the screen. She could reply, tell him where to go, tell him that their marriage was over. But a small part of her, one that was still desperately clinging to the hope that things could get better, hesitated. Would he change? That thought lingered in the back of her mind like a nagging voice. Would he really apologize and make it right? Or was it too late for that? No. Ella could no longer deceive herself. She knew the answer. It was too late. I can't go back to him, she whispered again, more firmly this time, as if saying it out loud would make it real. I won't. Linda squeezed her hand gently. I'll help you, Ella. We'll figure everything out. You don't have to do this alone. Ella closed her eyes, leaning back into the pillow. She could feel her baby moving inside her, the small kicks bringing her a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. This child was her future. This child was her reason to move forward. She would not let him grow up in a house full of anger and violence. She would not let her son witness the same toxic relationship that had nearly destroyed her. The next few days passed in a blur. Ella stayed in Linda's guest bedroom trying to recover from the physical pain, but it was the emotional weight that was the hardest to bear. Each day, Charles's calls and texts became more frequent, more desperate. Please, Ella. I'm sorry. I can't live without you. Let's fix this. At first she felt guilty. He was her husband after all. She had promised to love him through good times and bad. But then she remembered what he had done. The rage in his eyes. The way he had violated her trust. This wasn't love. One evening, as Ella sat on the couch with Linda, looking through baby clothes and preparing for the birth, her phone rang again. It was Charles. This time she didn't hesitate. She pressed the screen and his voice came through, shaky but insistent. Ella, please. Come back. I've been thinking. I was wrong and I need you. I'm so sorry for what I did. Ella stared at the phone for a moment, her heart pounding. For a fleeting moment she wanted to give in. To return to the man she had once loved. But then she thought of the way he had treated her, how he had burned her, how he had left her to suffer alone. And the desire to return to him evaporated like smoke in the wind. Charles, she said, her voice steady but cold. I'm done. I'm not coming back. We're over. There was silence on the other end and for a long moment, Ella thought he might hang up. But then she heard him speak, his voice thick with disbelief. You don't mean that. Please, Ella. We have a family. She swallowed, fighting back the tears. Not anymore. You destroyed this family, Charles. And I won't let you destroy me too. She ended the call before he could say anything else. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ella felt a sense of relief. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long finally lifted. She had made her choice and even though it hurt, she knew it was the right one. The city skyline glittered beyond the window, but inside Linda's cozy apartment, Ella sat with her arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Her eyes were fixed on the phone vibrating on the table. The name on the screen made her chest tighten. Charles. It was the 10th call that day. Her fingers itched to answer but she resisted. Every conversation with Charles was a battle. A tug of war between fake apologies and subtle threats. His voice still echoed in her mind from the last time they spoke. You think you can leave me? You think you can raise my child alone? We'll see about that. Her heart pounded as the phone finally stopped buzzing. But almost immediately a text appeared. Ella, you can run but you can't hide. You're my wife. And that child is mine. You'll come back. One way or the other. Ella gasped, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Her hand flew to her belly as the baby kicked, sensing her distress. She squeezed her eyes shut and whispered, You're safe with me, baby. I promise. He's getting worse, she muttered. Linda rushed from the kitchen, her face etched with concern. What did he say this time? Wordlessly, Ella handed her the phone. Linda's eyes widened as she read the message. This is dangerous, Ella. He's not just angry anymore. He's trying to scare you. Ella swallowed hard. And it's working. Linda sat beside her and squeezed her hand. We have to take this seriously. I know you're scared but you need legal help. If he's threatening you, you need protection. Protection? Ella gave a hollow laugh. Charles is rich and connected. He could make my life a nightmare if he wanted. Who's going to protect me from him? Linda's expression hardened. You're not alone. I know a good lawyer. A family lawyer. Let's get you a restraining order. Ella hesitated. The thought of escalating things with Charles terrified her. But as the baby kicked again, she felt a surge of determination. She had endured Charles's cruelty long enough. Now she had a child to protect. Okay, she whispered. Let's do it. The next morning, Ella sat in the dim office of Mr. Daniel Gray, a calm middle-aged lawyer with sharp eyes and a reassuring voice. He listened patiently as Ella described what had happened, from the pepper soup incident to the threatening messages. When she finished, he leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. I'm so sorry you've had to go through this, Mrs. Thompson, he said. But you've made the right decision coming here. Do I have a case? Ella asked, wringing her hands. You absolutely do. Domestic violence doesn't have to leave scars you can see. What he did to you was abuse and these messages are intimidation. We can file for a restraining order to keep him away from you and your child. And if you want, we can initiate divorce proceedings. Divorce. The word tasted like ash in her mouth even after everything Charles had done. But deep down she knew their marriage was beyond saving. Yes, she said softly. I want a divorce. Daniel nodded. I'll handle it. But be prepared. Men like Charles, controlling, prideful, they don't give up easily. Ella swallowed. I know. That night, as Ella settled into bed at Linda's apartment, she felt an unfamiliar sensation, relief. For the first time in weeks, she'd taken action. Charles might be powerful, but she wasn't defenseless. She drifted into a light sleep, only to wake hours later to the sound of her phone buzzing. Groggy, she reached for it. 1:42 a.m. A text from an unknown number. You think a piece of paper can stop me? You're still mine, Ella. And I always get what I want. Ella sat up with a jolt, her breath caught in her throat. Her heart raced as the fear returned in full force. Charles knew. Somehow he'd found out about the restraining order. Her hands trembled as she woke Linda. Together they called the police and reported the threat. An officer arrived within 30 minutes, a tall, serious man named Officer Collins. Miss Thompson, he said after reading the messages. We'll file a report and we'll increase patrols around the estate. But if you feel unsafe here, consider moving temporarily. Ella exchanged a glance with Linda. The thought exhausted her. But what choice did she have? By the next morning, Linda had arranged for them to stay in a short-term rental across the city. The apartment was smaller and less luxurious, but it was safe. Ella stood by the window later that night, staring at the unfamiliar street below. The reality of her situation weighed heavily on her chest. She was a pregnant woman hiding from her husband. A man who should have been her protector had become her greatest fear. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Charles's lawyer. Mrs. Thompson, the man's voice was professional but firm. Mr. Charles Thompson has filed a petition for full custody of your unborn child. The room spun. Ella grabbed the windowsill to steady herself. What? He can't do that. He can, and he has. He's claiming you're mentally unstable and unfit to raise the child. The court hearing is scheduled for next month. Ella dropped the phone and sank to the floor. Linda rushed over, picking up the phone to gather the details. He's trying to take my baby, Ella whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Linda knelt beside her. We won't let that happen. We'll fight him, Ella. All the way. In the days that followed, Ella worked closely with Daniel Gray to prepare for the custody battle. Charles meanwhile unleashed his power. His lawyer submitted false claims that Ella was depressed, unstable, and incapable of raising a child. They even produced staged photos of a disheveled bedroom and claimed it was her living environment. Ella was exhausted, but she refused to give up. For her child she would fight. The day of the court hearing arrived. Ella sat in the courtroom, her hands trembling in her lap. Across the room, Charles sat in a crisp navy suit, looking calm and confident. His eyes met hers with a smirk as though he'd already won. The judge called the hearing to order. Charles's lawyer spoke first, painting Ella as an irresponsible woman who'd abandoned her husband and was emotionally unstable. When Daniel presented Ella's medical records of the burns and the threatening text messages, Charles's lawyer dismissed them as an unfortunate marital disagreement. Finally, the judge turned to Charles. Mr. Thompson, did you or did you not pour hot pepper soup on your wife while she was 7 months pregnant? Charles shifted uncomfortably. It was a moment of anger, Your Honor. I lost my temper, but it wasn't meant to hurt her. She exaggerated what happened. The judge's expression darkened. You poured boiling soup on a pregnant woman. And now you want full custody of her child. Charles opened his mouth to respond, but the judge raised a hand. Enough. He turned to Ella. Mrs. Thompson, you will have full custody of your child. The restraining order remains in place. Mr. Thompson will attend mandatory counseling if he ever wishes to petition for visitation. Ella's breath caught in her throat. She squeezed Daniel's hand as tears blurred her vision. She had won. She had protected her child. Outside the courtroom, Charles tried to approach her. His face twisted in fury. This isn't over, Ella, he hissed. You'll regret this. Ella straightened her back and met his glare with new strength. No, Charles. I'm done regretting. And I'm done being afraid of you. She turned and walked away, her hand resting on her belly. Her son kicked in response, and for the first time in a long time Ella smiled. She had fought for their freedom and won. In the heart of the bustling city, Ella cradled her newborn son Ethan in her arms. His tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, anchoring her to the present moment. The sterile scent of the hospital room mingled with the faint aroma of baby powder, creating a cocoon of new beginnings. As she gazed into Ethan's innocent eyes, a wave of emotions crashed over her: relief, joy, and an undercurrent of anxiety. The courtroom victory had granted her legal protection, but the scars of her past with Charles lingered, casting shadows over her newfound freedom. Linda entered the room, her face lighting up at the sight of mother and child. "He's perfect, Ella," she whispered, gently touching Ethan's cheek. Ella smiled, though fatigue etched lines around her eyes. "He is. And he's my reason to keep moving forward." Linda sat beside her, her expression turning serious. "Have you thought about what comes next? Where you'll go?" Ella sighed, her gaze drifting to the window where the city skyline stood tall against the horizon. "I can't stay here. Charles knows this place and I can't risk him finding us." "I have a friend," Linda offered. "She runs a support group for women who've been through similar situations. They have resources, safe housing. It could be a fresh start for you and Ethan." Tears welled in Ella's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you, Linda. You've been my rock through all of this." Linda squeezed her hand. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself and that little boy." 2 days later, with Ethan bundled securely in her arms, Ella stood before a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The building was unassuming, a stark contrast to the opulence she once knew, but it exuded a warmth that money couldn't buy. Ms. Grace, the support group coordinator, greeted them with a kind smile. "Welcome, Ella. We've prepared a room for you and Ethan. It's a place to heal, to rebuild." As they settled into their new home, Ella felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The days blended into a routine of feedings, naps, and attending support meetings where she met other women who shared their stories of resilience and hope. One evening, after tucking Ethan into his crib, Ella sat in the common room with a cup of tea. The soft murmur of conversations filled the space, creating a comforting background hum. A woman named Sarah, with gentle eyes and a soothing voice, sat beside her. "How are you holding up?" Ella shrugged, staring into her tea. "Some days are better than others. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting Charles to appear." Sarah nodded. "It's normal to feel that way. Healing isn't linear. But remember, you're not alone. We're all here for you." As weeks turned into months, Ella began to reclaim pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. She enrolled in a counseling program, learning to navigate the complexities of her trauma. She discovered a passion for writing, pouring her experiences into stories that resonated with others in the group. One afternoon, while watching Ethan play with a stuffed lion, a gift from Linda, Ella received a letter in the mail. Her heart raced as she recognized the handwriting. "Charles." With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and read, "Dear Ella, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for everything I've done. Losing you and our son has been a wake-up call. I'm seeking help and trying to become a better person. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Sincerely, Charles." Ella's emotions swirled, anger, sadness, and a glimmer of hope that perhaps people could change. But she knew better than to let her guard down. Her priority was Ethan and ensuring they both had a future free from fear. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, a reminder of the past she had overcome and the strength she had found within herself. That evening, during the support group meeting, Ella shared the letter with the others. Miss Grace listened intently before speaking. "It's natural to feel conflicted. Abusers often express remorse, but actions speak louder than words. Focus on your healing and what's best for you and Ethan." Later that night, as she rocked Ethan to sleep, Ella whispered, "We've come a long way, little one. And we'll keep moving forward, one step at a time." In the vibrant city, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the skyline, Ella sat by the window of her modest apartment, cradling her son Ethan. The distant hum of traffic blended with the soft coos of her baby, creating a symphony of urban life and new beginnings. Months had passed since she had left Charles, and each day had been a step toward healing and rediscovery. The support group had become her sanctuary, a place where stories of resilience were shared and hope was rekindled. One evening, after a particularly engaging session where they discussed future aspirations, Ms. Grace approached Ella with a thoughtful expression. "Ella," she began, "I've been observing your journey, and I see a strength in you that's truly inspiring. Have you considered sharing your story with a broader audience?" Ella looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "There's a local radio station that features segments on personal stories of triumph over adversity. I believe your experience could empower many women facing similar challenges." The thought of speaking publicly about her ordeal sent a shiver down Ella's spine. Yet, beneath the apprehension, there was a flicker of determination. "I'll think about it," she replied, her mind already swirling with possibilities. That night, as Ethan slept peacefully beside her, Ella pondered the idea. She remembered the countless nights she had felt alone, believing there was no escape from her situation. If sharing her story could offer a lifeline to even one woman, it would be worth it. The following week, with Ms. Grace's encouragement, Ella found herself at the radio station. The studio was a hive of activity, with hosts and producers bustling about, preparing for various segments. A kind-faced woman named Clara greeted her. "You must be Ella. We're honored to have you here." Ella nodded, her palms sweaty with nervousness. "Just speak from your heart," Clara advised. "Your truth will resonate." As the on-aired sign illuminated, Ella took a deep breath and began recounting her journey, from the painful days with Charles to the solace she found in the support group, and the joy of raising Ethan in a safe environment. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before Clara spoke. "Thank you, Ella. Your courage is a beacon of hope." In the days that followed, the radio station received an outpouring of messages from listeners. Women from various walks of life shared their stories, expressing gratitude for Ella's bravery. One letter stood out. It was from a woman named Margaret who lived in a nearby town. "Dear Ella, your story mirrored my own in many ways. For years I endured in silence, believing I had no options. Hearing you gave me the strength to seek help. My children and I are now staying with a friend, and for the first time in a long while I feel hopeful. Thank you. Sincerely, Margaret Asterisk." Tears welled up in Ella's eyes as she read the letter. She realized that by sharing her pain she had transformed it into a source of strength for others. Inspired by the impact of her story, Ella collaborated with Ms. Grace to organize workshops aimed at empowering women. They covered topics like financial independence, recognizing signs of abuse, and building self-esteem. During one such workshop, as participants engaged in a lively discussion, Ella noticed a familiar face at the back of the room. It was Linda, her steadfast friend. After the session they embraced warmly. "Look at you," Linda said, pride evident in her voice. "You're making such a difference." Ella smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you." As they sat together watching Ethan play with other children, Ella felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey had been fraught with challenges, but it had led her to a place of purpose and community. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside her window, Ella received an unexpected phone call. "Hello. Ella, it's Charles." Her heart skipped a beat. It had been over a year since she had last heard his voice. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady. "I heard your radio segment," he began. I wanted to apologize for everything. I've been attending counseling and trying to change. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to tell you that I'm sorry." Ella listened, a myriad of emotions swirling within her. "Thank you for saying that," she replied after a pause. "I hope you continue on your path to healing." As she hung up, Ella felt a sense of closure. The chapter with Charles had ended and a new one had begun. One filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of a brighter future for her and Ethan. Under the vast expanse of the city sky, Ella whispered a silent vow to herself and her son, to cherish each moment, to embrace the journey ahead, and to always find strength in their shared story.